Alright, hello, welcome again. This is the second video I'm going to be posting, and you'll occasionally hear yourselves logging in the background as I'm recording on one computer that has a microphone that works, and then transferring it to Microsoft Teams so that you can watch it. We're going through the rest of the PowerPoint, or at least a good portion of the PowerPoint. This is going to be on the history of psychology, okay, and how far we've come. And well, it looks like I'm getting messages from you guys about I have to troubleshoot and things like that. But I'm going to keep rolling. So we're going through the PowerPoint slides. There we go. So after the big debate slide, the next slide has to do with this concept called empiricism. Like I said, psychology's been around forever and ever. We just didn't always call it psychology. Basically, for a long time, it was philosophy or ethics, things like that. So when we talk about empiricism, the idea all knowledge is derived from sensory experience. This comes from a philosopher named John Locke, John Locke believed that we're all born basically with nothing. He said our brains are a tabula rasa, or a blank slate. So what John Locke did, and a lot of other Enlightenment philosophers did, is start doing experiments based on this sensory experience idea. So the hope is that you learn something from the things that you do. So, for instance, if John Shear decides, hey, you know what, looks great, I'm going to put my hand on this hot stove. So he does it, burn, and he learns. Okay, knowledge derived from sensory experience, don't touch the hot stove. Or you see a dog barking at you and growling, and you say, I'm going to pet that dog because it's fuzzy. Dog bites you. What did you learn? It's basically empiricism. And so a lot of experimental science derives from that, especially, when we're talking about our own experiences and how they shape us. That's empiricism. Sensory experiences, shape us. That's how we learn about things. So moving on to the next slide, when we're looking at the history of psychology, really we're talking 1880, so it's not really that long ago compared to some of the other subjects we study in school. Wilhelm Wundt is our first psychologist you need to know about. He's known as the founding father of psychology. The main reason he's known as the founding father of psychology is he's the first guy to create a psych lab. Normally we think of psychologists as doing their work in office buildings where you lay on couches and you tell them about their feelings. But a lot of psychology is based on research done at universities, or research done in labs. And so Wilhelm Wundt is credited as coming up with the first psych lab. Now, it wasn't, super scientific with lots of computers and other funky gadgets. It was pretty simplistic, and it was based on this empirical idea that sensory experience shapes us, how we respond to it. So his main philosophy was to study what he called introspection. And this idea of introspection is that he's going to expose you to a stimulus and you're going to talk about how you feel. How are you experiencing the stimulus? So, for example, he's going to sprinkle water on your face, and you then tell him, how does it feel to have water on your face? That it's pretty simple, but it's the idea of introspection is exploring your own feelings and thoughts in response to sensory experience. So that's really what his lab did. I think there were even experiments where you just held your hand above a candle. Respond to that. Talk about how you're feeling. Well, it feels kind of warm. Pretty simplistic, but it's a breakthrough in the world of psychology, in terms of treating this like a science instead of just talking about our feelings all the time, actually doing research on our thoughts and feelings. So that's why he's considered the founding father. Now, the next slide after that hooks Wilhelm Wundt up with his buddy Edward Titchener, who brings these ideas. Wilhelm Wundt is German, obviously, if you recognize the way the Wundt is pronounced. And they bring the ideas over to the United States, Edward Titchener, and they call it structuralism, school of thought that seeks to identify the components and structure of the mind. So this is really the first school of thought in psychology, is that we're going to use introspection, we're going to use the research of labs to explore the structures of the mind. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about the 1880s here and 1890s. We don't really have x-rays or MRI machines. We're not exactly sure what each part of the brain does. We know there are different parts of the brain, but we're going to try to explore the structure, how each structure of the brain affects our behavior, affects our thoughts, affects our feelings. We're not really able to do that just yet in a super scientific way, but this is the start. So like I said, this is why Wundt is considered the founding father of psychology. Moving on, you have William James, the first psych textbook. William James is kind of considered your first real American psychologist. And he expands on these ideas, but really what he wanted to see was how our brain and our consciousness can adapt to our environment to help us survive. So it kind of almost sounds evolutionary at this point. Okay, the idea that we learn and our brain adapts our behavior, and this helps us, and our ancestors and the people long after us live into the future. Okay, so kind of this idea of when you think of like structuralism, you think structure of the mind. Okay, I'm going to explore different parts of the brain. Okay, using my experiments on introspection. Functionalism, I'm going to do experiments that show how your brain can adapt. Okay, your brain can adapt behavior and how we learn from it. Okay, so those are your first two schools of thought. Okay, you have Wilhelm Wundt creating your first lab, William James, who creates first psych textbook, and really he's the one that brings psychology to the college level. That he's the one that creates the subject that hopefully you will enjoy learning about this year in terms of studying it at a college level. Other key figures include G. Stanley Hall. So moving on to the next slide, G. Stanley Hall is kind of famous for being the first psychologist to study adolescence. Okay, and he really brought psychology in the mainstream by inviting people over to have these lectures at the school that he was president of, Clark University, including Sigmund Freud and other people like that. But one of the things he talked about, and we'll talk about him more next semester when we get to developmental psych, the idea that adolescence is a period of storm and stress. Okay, that really at any given moment you are going through massive emotions, massive feelings, and this creates a period where we're all kind of just train wrecks. Research since then has said that's not always true. Certain people are clearly doing okay, but he's kind of the one that first talked about let's study adolescence as their own group. The other two, Mary Calkins is your first female president of the American Psychological Association. Okay, so significant figure in history. And it shows that, a lot of the people we're going to be talking about due to systemic sexism are going to be male psychologists throughout history, but that even at an early time, women did have an impact. So Mary Calkins follows G. Stanley Hall as the first female president of the American Psychological Association, and Margaret Flo Washburn, the picture right there, woman with great hair right there, is the first woman to earn a PhD in psychology. I believe it was from Harvard University. Okay, so these are some background figures, and these people all show up in your vocab, so hopefully you write down. Really, what you should write down in vocab about people is like a couple interesting facts about them, or a couple things that they did, a couple things that they believed, and that will be how you're graded on vocab. So I'm going to post this video now, and hopefully, and get back to you guys in a minute, and we'll talk again soon.